Good evening. Take a hymnal and turn to 132. There's Power and Blood. We'll do first, second, and last verse. Let's stand and sing. Would you be free from the burden of sin? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you o'er evil a victory win? There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, wonder in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, one working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you be free from the passion and pride? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Come for a cleansing to Calvary's side. There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you do service for Jesus your King? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you live daily as praises to sing? And there's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb.
Well, good evening. Good to see everyone out tonight. As we get started, Kermit, will you open us in prayer, please? Amen. Thank you. As far as announcements are concerned, do you all have any? I don't have any announcements. There will be no deacon meeting tomorrow night and no business meeting this Wednesday. We're going to put everything off till next month since we're so close to next month. So, all right. Any announcements? Huh? So,
let's turn to 544. Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it. Let's 544. We'll do first, second, and last verse. Stand and sing. Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it. Redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed through his infinite mercy. His child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed. child, and forever I am. Last verse. I know I shall see his beauty, the King in whose law I delight, who lovingly guardeth my footsteps and giveth me song in the night. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, redeemed, his child, and forever I am. Amen. You may be seated.
All right, before we get started in our Bible study tonight, we'll take some prayer requests. Let me just mention a couple to you. OC will be having surgery on Tuesday to remove her gallbladder, so remember OC. Then Thursday, Danny Ellswick is going to have a heart ablation, I think in Kingsport. So remember those two. Do you have any others? Huh? Yeah, appendix, I'm sorry. I'm used to these gallbladders. Yeah, appendix, that's right, yes. Where's she at? Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, Josh, what was the last name? Josh? Street. Okay. Pollard Short. Do what? Okay. Do what? Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, Brenda, we put her on the prayer list this morning. We don't remember her last name. She's having a heart cath on Wednesday in Kingsport. It's a lady that Marcia graduated with. She was the known one to start with, but we don't know her married name. So remember. Orville Ratliff family. Okay. 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 Any others? Unspoken? Randy Van Dyke, would you pray for us, please?
May God, Father, thank you so very much for your
Thank you, Randy. All right, if you have your Bibles, if you will take those out, and Daniel chapter 8. All right, Daniel chapter 8. We finished chapter 7. Certain things about chapter 8 that we need to understand as we begin this. There's a change as far as the language that Daniel was written in. In the first 7 chapters, that it was written in Aramaic. And basically, probably why he wrote it that way is because it was concerning the Gentile history, the Gentile kingdoms, and the prophecy about those, okay? But as we come to chapter 8, we see that it's more specifically about Israel, okay? So from chapter 8 to the end of the book of Daniel, it will be written, it's written in Hebrews, okay? So, and this basically because it's God's plan for the nation of Israel during the end times. Now, when we understand, chapter 7 was written at about 551 or 553 BC. Now, these are the dates of the kingdoms, okay? So basically the 4 kingdoms that we'll look at tonight. But Babylon, they lasted from 605 BC to 539 BC, okay? So what we see here is about 14 years before the Medes and the Persians conquered Babylon, chapter 7 was written, okay? So you still got, 14 years before that the Medes and the Persians captured Babylon when chapter 7 was written, okay? Chapter 7 was written before chapter 5 in the book of Daniel. Chapter 8 is written in 551, 2 years after chapter 7 was written, okay? So chapter 8 is 551 BC, so it still falls in this time here. So as we look at this, just remember, Daniel is still in Babylon, okay? So as these are written, 2 years after this. And so as we begin chapter 8, we will see that as Daniel writes, we will see a difference between chapter 7 and chapter 8, okay? Because of not only the difference in the language, but now we're talking about, instead of just the whole kingdom of the Gentile kingdoms in the world during that time from Babylon on, that we're going to key in on Israel, okay? And so that's what this does tonight. This keys in on Israel, and it begins, and so it's written in the Hebrew language. And so it doesn't really mean anything to us as far as what we're going to be studying, but we just need to understand that chapter 8 begins a different story. If we were to break down Daniel according to the sort of an outline, we know in chapter 1 that it was the background of Daniel. Chapter 1 was all about Daniel and his background, okay? But as we begin with chapter 2 through chapter 7, we see how it's prophetic about the Gentile dominion over all the countries of the world, okay? So that's when we look at these, that's what we see here, that those 4 until 476 AD, that's when Rome sort of disintegrated. They ceased to be. They were there, but they weren't a kingdom that ruled the world at that time. They sort of dissolved from the inside, okay? Now, as we looked at, we begin in chapter, and then of course the last part, chapters 8 through chapter 12, it's the prophecy about Israel's destiny, okay? And so we'll be studying that as we look at chapters 8 through chapters 12. So let's begin with chapter 8, verse number 1. And it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar. So that puts us at 551 BC, okay? So Daniel, this is when the dream was. For whatever reason, Daniel decided to put it this way, I guess, so that their dreams will go along with the prophecies, okay? That we'll be looking at throughout the rest of the book. So it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. So the first time it was 553 BC. This time it's 551 BC. There's a 2-year difference in between those two visions, that dreams that Daniel had, okay? So in verse 2 we see, I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking, I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision that I was in the river of Uli. Now, when we look at this, Shushan was the capital city of the Medes and the Persians, okay? So as Daniel is having his dream, it is taking place somewhere in this area, okay? But we're probably getting close to this date as we see the dream, okay? So toward the end of the Medes and the Persian of their kingdom, okay? So it says, I saw, and so it happened that here he was in the capital city. It was about 250 miles east of Babylon. So, we go from Babylon. As we look at this, Babylon is no longer in existence, okay, as we begin this chapter. Because this comes in at about this area. This is where this dream is going to start, around 331 BC, all right? So that's what we're looking at as far as time-wise is concerned, all right? So it says that he saw this, he had this vision, and so it was in Shushan, which was the capital city of the Medes and the Persians at that time, and there was this river called Uli, and Daniel imagines himself here in this dream. He sees himself as he dreams, okay? And so here he is, and he has these visions. So as we begin to look at verses 3 and 4, it talks about the Mede and the Persian Empire, all right? So verse number 3, it says that then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there standing beside the river. Of course, we think about that, and Uli, this is the Medes and the Persians. This is their capital city. The river is there close to that, and so that's where he's located. So it says, standing beside the river, that there was a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high. Now, I don't know if you got your outline from chapter 7 or not, but if you do, you would go back and you look. If you remember the vision, that the first vision that Daniel had, that he saw, in King Nebuchadnezzar's vision, he saw the splendor of the kingdoms, okay, because he saw the big statue, and he started out with the head of gold and the arms of silver and the sides of brass and the legs of iron, okay? Now, when Daniel saw the first vision right here, then we saw he saw a vision of a lion. So Babylon was depicted as a lion, as that beast, okay? The Medo-Persian was as a bear. The Grecian was the leopard, and then Rome was a beast that wasn't an unknown beast, okay, because of its the savagery, okay? But now we see that as Daniel has this dream, that the Medo-Persian kingdom is now a ram, okay? So we see a difference there, okay? So it says, verse 3, then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there, standing beside the river, was a ram which had 2 horns, okay? And the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. So the Medes were the lower horn, and the Persians were the higher one, okay? That's just the strength that they were. The Persians were a little bit higher than the Medes as far as the kingdom was concerned. So we see those 2 things there, and we understand that. And of course, we know that there was the Cyrus or Darius. You remember chapter 5, it was Darius. He was of the Medes. And then Cyrus comes in later. He's the Persians that rule the Medo-Persian kingdom. Okay? And then it says in verse number 4, and it says, I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him or no other kingdom, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. Okay? Now, one thing that we see there, notice what it says, that the ram was pushing westward, northward, and southward. It was coming from the east. The ram, the Medo-Persians, did not want to go back east, go back behind them, because that's where where China and India and the Orient were located. They did not want to go that way, so they go these other three ways, okay? So we know that here they are, and which way that they're going. Now, that's the Medo-Persian kingdom. Now we come to the Grecian kingdom in verse number 5. It says, as I was considering, suddenly a male goat. Now here we go. We saw that the Grecian was, when we looked at those, they were the silver or the brass, the sides of brass, but also the leopard, okay, as far as Daniel's first dream was concerned. But now we see that they're no longer a leopard, but he sees them as a male goat, all right? So verse 5 says, and as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west, all right? So here we see that the Medes and Persians were pushing westward, northward, and southward, but now here comes the Grecian kingdom, and they're pushing westward. So there's going to be a head-on clash between the two, all right? And it says, across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. Now, we remember we talked about the Grecian kingdom. The army that they had they didn't have a huge army, but they could move lightning fast. Okay, that's what it talks about. They were a leopard in Daniel's first dream, all right, because they could move so fast. And it says here, without touching the ground. So they're moving really fast towards the Medo-Persian kingdom. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Now, the goat only had one horn. So who was the one horn? Who was the ruler of the Grecian kingdom? Alexander the Great, okay? Now, Alexander the Great was young, very young, okay? So probably about this time that he may be 31 years old, and he's the ruler of the kingdom, okay? So here we see that verse number 5, it says, without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes, okay? So that's Alexander the Great. Now, being that young, he would not have any descendants or any sons or anything that would be able to take his place on the throne should something happen to him. Well, something did happen to him. It says, then he came, verse number 6 says, then he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. Okay? So here the two kingdoms meet. There's going to be a collision, a head-on collision, and we'll see which one wins. Verse 7 says, and I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his two horns, which means he defeated the Medes and the Persians, okay? So they were defeated. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, okay? So the Medes and the Persians were beat by the Grecian. The Medes and the Persians could not stand up against the Grecian army. And he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, okay? So they were totally defeated. And there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. So there we see in those three verses that the 5, 6, and 7, that the Medo-Persians were defeated, which puts us where? It puts us to right here, okay? Now we're at 531 BC. The Medes and Persians are defeated. The Grecian has defeated them. So in 331 BC is where we're at as far as time-wise in Daniel's dream. All right, so now let's go to verse number 8. It says, therefore the male goat grew very great. But when he was strong, the large horn was broken, okay? So when we think about broken, what do we think about? What does it mean? It talks about death, okay? So Alexander the Great, when he was 33 years old, died, okay? Very young, all right? Now, when we look at this, notice it says, was broken, and in place of it were four notable ones came up towards the four winds of the earth. Okay, so, you know, when we talked about the four winds before, that was talking about in chapter 7, it was talking about the disruption that was going on. Now, imagine that the Grecian kingdom has just defeated the Medes and the Persian, but within 2 years, Alexander the Great dies. And so what do they do with the kingdom? Well, there's a struggle within the kingdom for several years, okay? Because there was no heir to the throne from Alexander the Great. So there becomes a struggle in the Grecian kingdom as to who will rule that kingdom, okay? And it goes on for several years. And if you look back on chapter 7, it talked about that. It lists the four heads were four generals under Alexander the Great, okay? So Cassander took Macedonia, Lysimachus took Asia Minor, Seleucus took Syria. Now, this is important. Seleucus took Syria, okay? So that was one of the four of the kingdoms, and we'll find out why in a few minutes. And then the fourth one, Ptolemy took Egypt. All right, so they divided the Grecian kingdom into four different generals who had control over those four different countries, or some of them had more than one country, okay? So that was divided, and so now we have four, okay? So we come back, then it says, and out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious Lamb. Now, which brings us to here, okay? So when we look at this, the little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes, all right? He came from this one here, the Seleucus genealogy, under that general, Seleucus. And so he grew out of here, Syria. All right, so he came from Syria. So what happened to him in verse number 9? It says, and out of one of them came that little horn. So that was Syria, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. Now, what do you think the glorious land is? Yeah, Israel, okay? So now remember, as we're looking at this is the little horn, all right? So where do we see the little horn again? Do we see it again somewhere? Yeah, in Revelation we will see it, that the little horn is the Antichrist, okay? So during the tribulation period, we see the little horn comes up again. So there is a reference between the two. In other words, the little horn during the tribulation period, there's no kin to here, but there were similarities in the way that they ruled, okay? And we'll take a look at those. But so here we see there's this little horn. Now, if you look on the back of your outline, you will see some of the similarities between the two little horns, okay? Between Antiochus Epiphanes and the Antichrist, okay? So you can see there is a comparison on the back of those, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. All right, so here we are, and we see now Antiochus Epiphanes, and what's he going to do? He's going to come and attack Israel. Remember, this is what chapter 8 is beginning about. It's about Israel. All right, and so we come to verse number 10, and it grew up in the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Now, when it talks about the host of heaven, he's talking about the Jewish people, okay? He's talking about the people of Israel. What all those are references to them, all right? So what does he do? He comes in and he grew, and it grew up against, in other words, Antiochus Epiphanes grew up to the host of heaven. In other words, he's going to attack the nation of Israel, all right? And it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Okay, these are God's people. And so he comes in and he persecutes them, okay? So he will kill some, he will put some in prison, he will be hard on a lot of those. Just when we go back and we look at in the book of the book of Revelation, that we know that the Antichrist, during the middle of the 7-year tribulation period, the Antichrist will set up his kingdom in the temple. He will do away with the sacrifices in the temple 3.5 years into it. And then he will set himself up as king. At that point, he will start to persecute the nation of Israel, okay? So here we see that Antiochus Epiphanes, he comes in. Now, he comes in about right here, all right? So 175 BC to 163 BC. So when we look here, it doesn't happen right away, okay? So there's more than 100 years that passes by, maybe 150 or more, that actually go by before the little horn comes up, okay? So remember, we're looking big time panorama, okay? So it's not just in a few years that these things take place, okay? So we're talking hundreds of years from here to here, okay? That take place or even from here to here, that we see there's a lot of time that takes place there, okay? So in verse number 11 it says, he even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host. Now he's talking about God himself, okay? Now, the one thing that we need to understand is God allowed it to happen, okay? Could God have stopped it? Absolutely, okay? But he allowed this to happen. God has his reasons why he allows things to happen. Did he do it, cause it to happen? No, but he allowed it to happen, okay? And so we see that it takes place. And so he challenges God. What does the Antichrist do in Revelation? He challenges God. After all, the devil, what does he want to be? He wanted to be God. He wanted to be worshipped, okay? That's the reason he got kicked out of heaven to start with, right? And so we see that's what he wants to do. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes, if you read history, most of those historians and the biblical scholars sort of agree that his nickname, you know what his nickname was? Madman, okay? They mostly all agree that he was demon-possessed, okay? That he didn't have the power by himself, okay? Just like at the Antichrist. Who empowers the Antichrist in the book of Revelation? Satan does, okay? So here again we see the connection between the two little horns, okay? They're both empowered by Satan, all right? So in verse number 11, he even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, okay? So the nation of Israel was doing their daily sacrifices, so what does the little horn do? He comes in and stops those, okay? So what happens in Revelation? Well, the Antichrist, 3.5 years into the tribulation period, he comes in and he stops all the sacrificial system, okay? So here we see another example of how the two come together, okay? He exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, verse number 11, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away in the place of his sanctuary. Now notice when it says his sanctuary, it's talking about God's sanctuary, okay? So it's not the little horn sanctuary, but it's God's sanctuary. He says he comes down, he stops the sea, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of God's sanctuary was cast down. In other words, the little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes, comes in to the temple of Israel during this time, and he comes in and he does away with their sacrificial system. All right? So just like the Antichrist will do during the tribulation period, okay? So here we see that he comes in and he does that. And he says, because of the transgression, okay? Now, the transgression is, it's not Israel's transgression, but if you look in verse number 13, notice what it says there. It says, then I heard a Holy One speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, okay? In other words, this transgression is where the little horn comes in and he sets up his own sacrificial system, okay? So it's the desecration of the Jewish sacrificial system, okay? So he comes in and sets up his own, all right? And so we see that takes place. That's just exactly what's going to take place during the tribulation period with the Antichrist. He's going to do the same thing. He's going to come in and do away with Israel's and set up his own, okay? Now it says, because of the transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices. In other words, God allowed Antiochus Epiphanes to come in and do that, all right? And so he had an army. He was very strong. There was opposition to him. There was opposition for those 7 years, 8 years, 7 years that he was there, or 12 years that he was there. There was opposition against that, okay? But they could not defeat the little horn here, okay? So there was, for 7 years, there was sort of a battle going on here, all right? Now, verse 12, because of the transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices. He cast down truth, okay, to the ground. We're talking about the Word of God and the sacrificial system of God. He did all this and prospered. Again, that we see that it was God permitted, okay? He allowed this to happen. It was the permissible will of God. And it was for a short time. Just as we look back at or look to the tribulation period, God is going to allow that to happen. He has a purpose for that. He will bring judgment at the end of the tribulation period. So verse 13 says, now, we see that takes place. Here we have Antiochus Epiphanes. He comes in, and he's going to be there for these 12 years, okay? And so that it doesn't start out that way, okay? So in 175 BC, that doesn't mean that he comes in and destroys everything to start with, just like the Antichrist. In the book of Revelation, what happens? As the first at the beginning of the tribulation period, the Antichrist will make a covenant with Israel to protect them for those 7 years, okay? And we know that the first 3.5 years, he keeps his word, more or less, okay? But then at the end of the 3.5 years, he changes his mind, he breaks the covenant with Israel, and he sets up his own system, okay? So here we see the same thing sort of happens, is that the little horn will come in here, and he'll start, but it will be gradual, but then it will work up till he persecutes, okay? So there's that time period that's in there. All right, so there we are right now. So we come to verse 13. It says, then I heard a Holy One speaking. Now, Holy One, what would you guess the Holy One was? An angel, okay? And another Holy One said to that certain one who was speaking. Now, here's Daniel. He's at the river Ulai, and now he hears these angels speaking, okay? And so he says, how long, these are the two angels speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? In other words, Daniel's seeing his vision. He sees the little horn, or Antiochus Epiphanes, and he sees what's going on to the nation of Israel with their sacrificial system in the temple. And so he hears these two angels asking, how long is this going to last? Okay? So how long will this rebellion that Antiochus Epiphanes brings against Israel, how long is it going to last? All right? And then verse 14, we get the answer to it. And it says, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Okay? So how long does the tribulation period last? 7 years. Okay? So this period that he's talking about here, 2,300 days, is about 6.5 years. Okay? So the two are not the same. There's two different events that take place. Okay? So this is taking place during this time. Okay? During this period right here. So what we're reading about now. So it says, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, then suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. Okay? So now we're going to see Gabriel appear. Okay? We see Gabriel a lot in the Bible. And here we see him again. So Daniel sees what happens. He hears the two angels talking, and it says it's going to be 2,300 days. And then we see, and so Daniel was wondering what was going on, okay? And he wanted to know the meaning of the whole dream, okay? Because remember, where's Daniel? Daniel's right here. He's having the dream right here. All this is taking place down here. So there's a big time frame. So he's not even here yet, okay? The Medes and the Persians hasn't come in and captured Babylon yet, which took place in chapter 5. But here, as we see this, Daniel knows that something's going to take place, but he's not sure because as he's having this dream, Babylon is not there anymore, okay? So because it's the Medes and the Persians, because he's at their capital, and then the Grecian Alexander the Great comes in, and they capture the Medes and the Persians. So Daniel wants to know the meaning of all this, all right? So he says, verse 16, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. Okay? So, probably a lot of commentators say that when he heard a man's voice, notice it says, between the banks of the Ulai. So how many banks does the river have? 2 banks, all right? And so in between the banks, so somewhere over the river, he hears a voice. He doesn't see a vision, but he hears a man's voice. So who do you think it is? God. It's God speaking to Gabriel, and he's telling Gabriel, Gabriel, give Daniel the meaning of this, the interpretation of his dream, okay? So we come to verse 17. And so he came near where I stood, talking about Gabriel came near to Daniel. And when he came, I was afraid, and I fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end, okay? Now, there's two different times of the end, okay, because he's going to mention 2 different times. The time of the end, let's go on, and we'll clarify that in just a second, okay? So this refers to the time of the end, all right? So there's a lot of the visions that Daniel saw, even in the vision he had here, there's dual meanings to some of the things that we read, okay? Some refer to the events taking place here. Some refer to the events that take place during the tribulation period, okay? So let's go on. He says at the time of the end. Verse number 18. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and stood me up. And he said, look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation, for at the appointed time the end shall be. Okay? Now, he talks about in verse 20 that the ram that you saw having the 2 horns, he talks about who that was. Okay? So that was the Medes, Media and Persia, the Medes and the Persians. And the male goat, he says, was the kingdom of Greece, which was Alexander the Great. And the large horn that is between its eyes is the first king, which was Alexander the Great. Okay? So we've already established that. So now we come to verse 22. And as for the broken horn, all right, talking about Alexander the Great dying, and the 4 that stood up in his place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power, okay? So we know that those four kingdoms came out, and the four generals, they broke the kingdom down into four different areas, and those four generals each took an area, okay? But they didn't have the power that Alexander the Great did, okay? So if you got one person in charge, you got a lot of power. You put four people in charge, you don't have a lot of power, okay? So not with the power Alexander the Great had. Verse 23 says, and then in the latter time of their kingdom, okay? So what is their kingdom? Well, it's this kingdom here, okay? When these generals are in charge and the little horn comes up. So we're still in this period right here, okay? So as he talks about that in verse 22 says, and the broken horn which stood in its place, the four kingdoms, okay, verse 23. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fulfillment, a king shall arise having fierce features who understands sinister schemes. So what we have here is a dual interpretation, okay, which means he's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, but he's also talking about the Antichrist, which is going to be at the very end times, okay? So he says there that a king shall arise having fierce features who understands sinister schemes, okay? So remember, he was empowered, the little horn here, Antiochus Epiphanes, was empowered by Satan, okay? So that's where he got his power from, all right? But now, he was defeated, but not with human hands. Notice what it says here. He says, in the latter time of the kingdom, when the transgressors have reached the fullness, a king shall arise having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not with his own power, which means, again, that he is demon-possessed. He will have his power from Satan, okay? So that it's looking towards the tribulation period when the Antichrist is empowered by Satan as well. He shall destroy fearfully, and he shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. Now, we know that happened in both events, okay? With this event here and also at the tribulation period. Through his cunning, he shall cause deceit. Now, verse 25 sort of starts to come back to the tribulation period, because we know that the Antichrist is going to change times in the laws when he sets up his kingdom, okay? Verse 25 says, through his cunning he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule, okay? So what do we know about Satan? He is a liar. He deceives, okay? So we know that will take place in both kingdoms, okay? Because they're both of those rulers are empowered, both little horns are empowered by Satan. And he shall exalt himself in his heart, okay? The little horn here does, the little horn in the tribulation period, exactly the same thing, okay? He shall even rise against the prince of the princes, okay? So we know that the Antichrist in the tribulation period will want to rise against Christ, but then Antiochus Epiphanes, he doesn't know about Christ yet, but he rises against God, okay? So he comes up and blasphemes God, okay? And he shall rise even against the prince of the princes, but he shall be broken without human means. Now, both of these were broken, or one of them is, the other one hadn't happened yet. Antiochus Epiphanes died of bowel dysfunction some way, but he also went insane, okay? So he died. He wasn't defeated himself by a person, although Judas Maccabeus, if you go back and read about the Maccabeans, that they finally came in, Judas Maccabeus came in and got an army together, and they finally defeated Antiochus Epiphanes' army that he had, okay? Right there. So he's done, okay? And they come back in and set up, the nation of Israel does, they set up their sacrificial system again. That's what we read there. How long is it going to last? 2,300 days. After 2,300 days, Antiochus Epiphanes will be defeated, but not by human hands, although his army will be afterwards. But then the same thing in the tribulation period, that the Antichrist will be defeated, not by human hands, but by who? By Jesus Christ himself. When he comes in at the end of the tribulation period, and he will come in and put Satan down. And so we see those two things, the parallel between these two things, okay? So all of these are against the nation of Israel. So what if you're Daniel and you see these, you read about Antiochus Epiphanes, and he's going to come in and he's going to attack Daniel's people, okay? How would that make you feel? Not too good, probably, okay? Knowing that you're king. What if you read history and you could read ahead of time and you saw the defeat of the United States? How would that make you feel? Not very good, would it? Okay? It would definitely make you worry, okay? So verse 26 says, "And the vision of the evenings and the mornings which was told is true. Therefore seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future." Now he's talking about the very end times, okay? That it's not that it's available. It's not like it's sealed and hidden somewhere where nobody can read it, because we can read it, okay? But it's not going to happen yet. And so he says it's many days in the future. And notice how Daniel reacted to it. "And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick for days. Afterward I arose and went about the king's business. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it." Okay? Even though Daniel, Gabriel was there to try to explain it to Daniel, and he did, he interpreted it, but it was way beyond what Daniel could really understand at that time, exactly what was going to take place. When we look back to history, we know all of this took place. Everything here we know took place. History verifies it. Everything that was written in the book of Daniel, you can go back to history and verify all these things. So if you want to go back and look at history, there it is. So when you read the book of Daniel, matter of fact, there are a lot of skeptics in this world, would you agree, that don't believe the Bible or in miracles or anything else like that. The skeptics say this book had to be written after all these things. It's so accurate. But it was written before all these things, okay? So what God gave Daniel to write down, Daniel wrote it down, and everything took place, okay? The word of God was fulfilled. The prophecies of God was fulfilled 100%. So what does that tell us? If this was fulfilled, if God fulfilled all of this 100%, can we then go back and read the rest of the Bible and expect God to fulfill all the other prophecies that he's given us? Absolutely, okay? So we knowing that this is verified by history, that we can go back and know that what God's word is going to say, the things that's going to take place in the future will take place as well. All right, if you look at it's 7 o'clock, but if you want to look at those things on the back, the comparison between the two little horns, you can read those, and both basically happen, both of them the same. All those things, both of them happen with both of those guys. All right? All right, any questions? All right, we're ready for choir practice. Phil, would you dismiss us, please?